Join us in a festival that promises to be extraordinary, because Bali is extraordinary.
Hi everyone, welcome to Ubud Writers and Readers Festival 2021. This year, the festival returns with the theme Mulat Sarira, self-reflection, which is drawn from Balinese Hindu philosophy. And from the 8th to the 17th of October, we will explore the meaning of self-reflection, cultural introspection, and human rights, examining who we are, what unites and divides us, and what drives our actions. My name is Desi Anwar, and this is my pleasure and honor to host this session. Ruth Ozeki, The Book of Form and Emptiness. And let me tell you a little bit about Ruth Ozeki. She is an internationally renowned author. Her books include My Year of Meat, this is published in 1998, and All Over Creation in 2003. They've been translated into 11 languages and published in 14 countries. Her third novel, A Tale for the Time Being, published in 2013, won the LA Times Book Prize and also shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and the National Book Critics Circle. Now, Ruth is also a filmmaker, a documentary and dramatic independent films, including Halving the Bones, have been shown on PBS, at the Sundance Film Festival, and at colleges and universities across the country. And Ruth is also a Zen Buddhist priest. She's a longtime Buddhist practitioner and ordained in 2010 and currently affiliated with the Brooklyn Zen Center and the Everyday Zen Foundation. We are currently talking to her in Massachusetts. Apparently she splits her time between Western Massachusetts, New York City, and British Columbia, Canada. And she currently teaches creative writing at Smith College. And I believe that she is in her room at her office at the moment. And in today's session, we will discuss Ruth's new novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness. This is published by Viking, and it's just come out very recently, if I'm not mistaken, on the 21st of September. And it tells the story of a young boy who, after the death of his father, starts to hear voices and find solace in the companionship of his very own book. Unfortunately, the pandemic is preventing us from gathering in beautiful Bali, but fortunately, technology is making it possible for us to connect. Hello, Ruth.
Hello.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And yes, I wish I could be there. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could be in Bali, but here we are. I'm in Jakarta. So, Ruth, it's the last couple of years been a very challenging one for all of us on this planet. It's been a traumatic year full of sadness, anxiety, and loss. And I personally have lost some friends and acquaintances, and but how's the past year been for you, particularly emotionally and intellectually? And
It's been very difficult. I teach at Smith College, and when the pandemic struck, we were in the middle of class, and suddenly an email came through, and the students were told that they had 48 hours to leave campus. And so they had to pack. Everyone burst into tears, and but we continued. We actually finished our class that day. We this was the solace of writing, and And I think I remember everyone felt like they wanted to continue class because this was, probably going to be the last one that they would have with our group in person. And so it was, after that, we did all of the things that we needed to do. We learned how to use this, kind of wonderful technology. And we soldiered through as best we could. We were the lucky ones. There were so many people, just like you, I have friends and luckily no family, but I, have had friends who've been lost and who've suffered loss. And so I think that's, that's certainly part of, that was kind of the defining feature, hasn't it been, of the last couple of years. But in the U.S., we had a period of political turbulence before that, and so really when I think about the sort of disruption of the country, of my country, I think about that really as starting in 2017. 2016.
With Donald Trump becoming president.
That's right. Something, the tenor and the tone of the country, the feeling of the country changed very, very, a lot. And so it has been traumatic. I think it's been very traumatic.
I think it's been traumatic for all of us, for the planet, but also on the individual level. And I'm just interested on the spiritual level, because you're also a Zen Buddhist. Do you think it's teaching us something? I mean, what are the lessons that we need to learn? Because a crisis is also an opportunity in some ways, isn't it, for us to either change or...
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. It's always hard when you're in the middle of a situation that's causing great suffering to see any benefit of
any light,
any light, right? Exactly. But I do think the lesson that we are really being forced to learn is that that we are one planet. We are one people, and the pandemic is teaching us this. Our economic interdependence is teaching us this. There are a lot of signals. There are a lot of signs, pointing the way. And I think that really is the lesson that we need to learn from the pandemic in particular. That there certain viruses don't really respect national borders.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it could be that we're also the cause of the virus.
That's right. That's right.
Our actions. The book, A Form of Emptiness, which is the main point of our discussion. I just finished reading it, and I have to say I really enjoyed it. Although maybe enjoy is not exactly the right word. I feel a lot of sadness, and there's a lot of trauma and loss, anxiety throughout the book. And the references in the background is, I see the current issues like global warming, that's political issues, conflicts, social conflicts, capitalism, consumerism, all sorts of things. Tell me about when did you start writing the book and the impetus that got you to write the book? I know it's published recently, but how long did it take you, and the sort of surrounding the creation of the book? I started writing the story in probably it was 2012. So I think that the whole process has taken me about 8 years, maybe even a little bit longer. It's always hard to pinpoint, where a book comes from, because I think that, it's more that, several factors, a whole group of factors start to constellate, and they start to sort of come together, and then from this constellation, a character is born, or an idea for a story is born. Certainly, one factor in this case was the locate. A lot of the book is set in a library. And in the library, there's a cast of characters who are, a little bit fantastical, right? There's a young performance artist who the young boy protagonist falls in love with. There's Alice or Aleph.
That's right. And
she's a great character.
Yeah. And then there's a Slovenian, poet philosopher named the Bottle Man. And
Slavoj is his
that's
real.
Right. That's right. And then, of course, there's superhero librarians, because all librarians are superheroes, right? And then that's also where Benny meets his book, right? And so that location of the library and many of those characters actually were immigrants from an early draft of A Tale for the Time Being. Yeah, and so when I was writing that book, it became clear to me that this storyline of the library didn't fit in that book, and so I kind of unzipped the manuscript and put that group of, that was probably several hundred pages, put that aside, and the characters just refused to go. They refused to die. They wanted a life. They wanted a fictional world of their own, and so I think that was a large impetus in the in this creation. And then the other thing, of course, was this idea about voice hearing. This notion of or this phenomenon that actually I would even call it more an array of experiences that we might call voice hearing. And I was interested in that as a writer, of course, because, I hear voices all the time, right? But I'd also had a different experience hearing voices after my father died. And I, would be doing something like washing the dishes or folding the laundry. And I would hear him sort of behind me. And he would, clear his throat, and he would say my name. And I would, look around, because I, of course, expected, there was his voice, and I'd look around and then suddenly remember, oh, right, he's dead, And then the grief, the sense of grief and loss would kind of hit me again. And this happened, over the course of about a year or so, maybe half a dozen times. And then it sort of faded away. So I had that experience, and that was an experience I gave to the young boy, Benny, in the protagonist of the book.
The protagonist.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, I have to correct you there, Ruth. The book is the protagonist.
That's true. That's true.
which makes me go back to the title. I mean, it's a book, but the title is the book. The book, a form. And emptiness, and I find it quite an interesting sort of way of storytelling. This is a book about a book, writing a book, and talking to the boy who is also talking to the book, and yet the book is also talking to us as a reader. So there's like sort of layers and layers of this book thing, and I'm just curious, because this is a kind of the style that I haven't met before. Yeah. And let me just read a little quote of what the book actually says, about book writing. And this is the book talking to Benny. It says, because really, who is writing whom? It's the old chicken and the egg conundrum, Benny. Think about it. Does the boy write the book, or does the book write the boy? So what is it, Ruth?
I think it's both. I think it's a co-creation. I think the book writes the boy and the boy writes the book. I think that it's really through the conversation that the book and the boy are having together, right? That the story emerges, right? So it is the chicken and the egg, which comes first. But I think they mutually create each other, and I would say that's true for all of us. I think that's true for all of us, right? And it's true for all books too.
Yeah, and the book also says about the reader, and it says the reader is not a passive receptacle for a book's content, not at all. You are our collaborators, our conspirators, breathing new life into us. And because every reader is unique, each of you makes each of us mean differently, regardless of what's written on our pages. Can you, because this is completely metaphysical, so what is then the idea of a book? Because this is a talking book, and yet you are also, your role as the author, and there's the role of me as the reader, and then there's the role of book or books in general, because the book at the end talks about us, which are, the world of books.
That's right.
Tell me, more about that.
Sure. Well, I was being playful with this idea, but since it's a story about a boy who hears objects speaking to him, right? It seemed to me, of course, that the book should be a speaking object, because that's what books are. Books are speaking objects, right? And so it made sense.
They have a lot of words.
They have a lot of words, and they talk to us. I mean, we have this expression, this idiom, oh, that book really spoke to me, right? I mean, it's a common idiom in English, right? So I just kind of made that literal. It's kind of a metaphorical phrase, but I just sort of turned that and made it literal. Another phrase that we use in English a lot is this phrase, oh yes, he has a book in him, right? Or she has a book in her, right? And so once again, I mean, just kind of making that literal, right? Benny has a book in him, right? And so I was just kind of playing with language like that. But I guess I've always been, this is actually, I think this is my fourth novel, right? And so, because there was one more novel in there, All Over Creation was a novel that I wrote in between My Year of Meats and A Tale for the Time Being. But, when I write a novel and I send it out into the world, we think of it as, a book, right? This is a book, right? In the singular, implying that everyone has the same experience reading it. But when when I go out and speak to readers, one of the first things I realize is that the book that they're reading is not necessarily the book that I wrote.
It has a life of its own.
It has a life of its own. That's right. And the person has, the reader has invested the book, this thing that we call the book, with their own lived experience. Right. And so it really is as though, that you and I have created one version of, the Book of Form and Emptiness, but that's going to be very different than the versions that other readers will, collaborate and co-create. Right. And so, I mean, to be kind of fanciful, it's like a quantum multiverse, it's like this idea that, even though we're talking about one book, it's not just one book. It's a whole array of books. It's a whole
possibility of books.
That's right.
Until it finds a voice. That's what the book says. When I remember the scene when Benny goes to the bindery, and that's when he has this sort of epiphany, when the words come, and the book looks for a voice in order for it to live. And I feel that it's interesting, which makes me wonder, so what is it? This book, the Book of Form of Emptiness, is Benny's book. I mean, he claims it. This is my book. But what about you? Where do you come in? Is this your book? I mean, what's your relationship to the book?
Apparently I wrote this book. Apparently that happened. That was a while ago. I haven't been writing this book for a while now, at least a year. I think that the writer of the book is no longer, right? And she's been replaced by me, who is the author, right? And the author is the author is kind of like the public relations, division, who goes around, and talks about the book, right? But the writer doesn't talk about the book. The writer writes the book, right? So that was then, and this is now, right? Also, though, I have to say that, when I was working on the book, I was trying very hard to hold it very lightly, and not control it too much. And so I would kind of invite the world into the book, into this, into the book, and just sort of watch and see what the characters would do. I had this rule, for example, where if somebody gave me a present, something that was kind of special, I would put it in the book and see what happened, right? And so, because the book is about objects that speak, right?
So it's full of objects.
It's full of objects, right?
Yeah. It's not empty.
It's not empty. No. It's full. And so, for example, my friend, went to the Bahamas and brought me back a little snow globe, a little snow globe with a sea turtle in it. One of those things that that you shake up and all of the pretty little sparkles, come down. And so I put that in the book. I gave it to Benny's mother, Annabelle. And then the next thing I knew, she was, she had gone onto eBay and she was, collecting snow globes, right? And then the young artist started making snow globes, right? She started making these kind of catastrophic snow globes. And so this image of the snow globe just kind of proliferated throughout the book. And so that's what I mean about, kind of holding it very lightly and not trying to control it that much, but just sort of introducing random things into the book and then watching it. So in a way, there's a character in the book who's in the library, and she's called the typing lady. And
she's always typing, and
I
kind of imagine that this could be the author.
That's right. If there's
inserting
one character,
herself.
That's right. If there's a character who I really identify with, that's it. I'm the typing lady. Don't blame me. I'm just the typing lady.
But it's objects. I mean, it's the book is full of objects. Annabelle is Benny O's mother. She's a hoarder. I mean, she just her house is just a complete mess. Tell me a little bit about the role of objects. Well, the book itself talks about form and emptiness, but like I said, it's just full of objects. And there are references to, the way we accumulate possessions over time. We are a consumer society where capitalism is based on people buying and selling and producing things. And then, part of the problem we have in this world is pollution caused by just the rubbish we throw and everything. Tell us a little bit more about this idea of form, emptiness, and then these objects that Annabelle's mother actually, she fell underneath all her possessions and almost died.
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to write about. I knew that I wanted to write about objects because of the relationship that I have had recently with objects, and that really was when my parents died. I inherited their house, and it was filled with objects. And each one of those objects, my mother's side of the family is Japanese, right? And so there were all of these Japanese objects that I felt had stories in them. They had, I didn't understand what they were exactly, but, I just remember thinking like, I wish they could talk, I wish they could speak. I wish they could tell me their stories. And on my father's side, my father was an anthropologist, right? And so he had, these amazing objects that had been given to him, by the people that he worked with, Native American, baskets and sculptures and various things, right? And again, I had this feeling like these objects, if only they could talk, right? But then there were also other objects like, just random things like his stapler, or, a box of, or many boxes of checks with his signature on them. Things that, that also had stories, but they were different stories. So in any case, I got very sort of sensitized to this idea that objects have stories. And I was also thinking a lot about, what happens. If you take an object like a running shoe, for example, like a sneaker, right? When you think about like all of the raw materials that go into making a sneaker, making the rubber, the plastic, the metal, the cloth, and then all of the people involved in the making of it, the people who, work in the factories and who have touched and interacted with some part of that running shoe, and then all of the people involved in distributing it and sending it and shipping it and selling it and, et cetera, right? I kind of had this idea that, if all of those people kind of left part of themselves, attached to that running shoe, it would be a very busy, crowded place, and so I just started kind of playing with these ideas and thinking
it's as if every object has spirit, and I think it's also interesting because you made a distinction, especially in the sound of the voices, of objects that are man-made, like a teapot or running shoes, as opposed to nature, the sound of trees, or it's. But there is about the objects that also I find interesting because it sort of relates to possession. Do we own the objects, or do the objects own us? And there's a character in it, Icon. She's the Japanese, the cleaning lady, the one who used to be attached to material things, and then, finds that, meets this Buddhist monk, and then she becomes a Buddhist nun and talks about how to declutter your life. Tell me about that.
Yeah.
What's the role of objects in general in our life, and also in the context that basically we get attached to these things? And maybe it's like a Buddhist, there's a Zen, because she is like a Zen art of tidying up, the tidy magic.
Right. That's right. Yes, she writes a book. She writes this book, Tidy Magic, and she was, based kind of lightly on Marie Kondo.
Yes,
the tidying guru.
I didn't want to mention a name, but yes, absolutely. All the.
And I was just fascinated when Marie Kondo became an international phenomenon, because what I saw in her was something, just sort of very basic Japanese cultural attitude towards objects, that you would treat them with respect, right? And there's a long tradition of this in Japan, particularly in the indigenous Japanese religion of Shinto, So, for example, back in the days when, a woman might have a sewing needle, right? Before sewing needles were mass produced, it was a precious object, right? And she would use it to sew clothes for her family. And at some point, the needle would break. Yeah. And when it broke, you wouldn't just throw it away. You'd save it. And then once a year at the temple, or at the shrine, the Shinto shrine, they would have a service for broken needles and pins. And you would bring your broken needle to the shrine, and on the altar they would have a block of tofu, right? And the tofu is very soft, right? And so you would place your needle in the tofu, so that your needle would have a soft resting place,
Oh, as a kind of thank you for your service. Exactly. Goodbye. Yeah. May you rest in peace.
That's right. That's right. And I just think that these old ways, it's very beautiful compared to.
Well, I find it extremely, touching, because then it makes you, start appreciating. And one of the things that we have too many objects, too many possessions, and we don't value them.
That's
we just
right.
throw them away, and it creates problems. It creates a lot of rubbish.
That's right. That's right. And also, I mean, the objects that we buy now are built to break, right?
Has an obsolescence.
Obsolescence, right? Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug, right? So exactly. And that's a problem, right? I think.
Yeah, and it's polluting our oceans, of plastic, and then it ends up in us.
That's right.
So it's like this cycle. The Zen sort of element, I notice, obviously, and you're a Buddhist priest, a Zen. Tell me a little bit about your Zen journey. You said earlier in our conversation you weren't actually born in Japan. Is this something that you discover, or tell us a little bit, and how does it fit into all the writings that you've published?
Yeah. When I was growing up, my mother was not at all interested in religion, but my grandparents, my Japanese grandparents, were both Zen Buddhists. And so the first memory I have as a little tiny person is the memory of my grandfather sitting in meditation, right? And this was very impressive to me. And so all throughout my youth, I remember trying to meditate, wanting to meditate. And I was, a lot of this was, sort of exploring my identity, as an Asian person, as a Japanese person, right? But then,
how old were you then?
Oh, I think when I first saw my grandfather, I think I was 3 years old. And then when I was 7 or 8, I remember trying to meditate in front of a candle, And then when I was 14, I was initiated into transcendental meditation. And then, when I was living in Japan, I was involved with, the Zen arts. So I was doing art forms that were, associated with Zen. And then when I came back to the States in my 30s, I started sitting with a Tibetan group. I started working with practicing with a Tibetan group. And then eventually kind of came full circle and sort of rediscovered Japanese Zen through a wonderful teacher in California named Norman Fisher. And you know, he's a wonderful poet and a writer, and you know, I met him and we just, you know, I just really respected him. I just felt like this is somebody I can really trust. And so I started practicing with his group, his Sangha, and just got more and more serious about it. I mean, this was at a time when, you know, my parents were getting old and they were, you know, they were approaching death, and then they were dying. And, you know, this is traditionally, of course, the time that people get serious about, you know, about Buddhism, right? Yeah. You know, sickness, old age, and death, you know, are traditionally the, you know, the sort of, it's what makes you realize that, you know, that practice, that having some sort of practice like this would help. And it did help me. And I think that's, yeah, it helped me.
In what way did it help you?
Well, you know, it's the meditation practice has always been very helpful to me, just in that it allows me to sort of stay present with whatever it is that's happening. You know, most of the time when something unpleasant is happening, our natural, you know, response is to, you know, just run away, right? I can't deal with it, you know. But so often that's not you know, I mean, obviously, if there's a, you know, if there's a tiger or a lion who's about to, you know, eat you, then you know,
the flight or fight thing, you know, kicks in.
Yeah.
But how has this the Zen, because you know the references to Zen and the Buddhist philosophy, obviously, you know, it's very much a central theme in the book. How has it affected your writings? And
yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, I think, in that it, you know, the practice of meditation has really helped me stay present, you know, in the writing process too. And you know, I mean, writing takes a long time, and it's not necessarily
8 years. You know,
8 years, right? Exactly. And it's not fun all the time. You know?
Does it always take you this long to?
Yeah, it's getting worse and worse. I seem to be taking longer and longer. I don't know.
Really, why is that? Is that the, you know, the creative process for you is what? Is sort of like an ongoing osmosis or mulling?
I think part of it is just that I got greedy, you know, and I started wanting to do a lot of other things too. I started wanting to, you know, I wanted to teach, right? I thought it would be wonderful to, you know, to teach. And so I, you know, took this job, you know, teaching. And then too.
And is it wonderful?
It is wonderful. It is wonderful. I really enjoy it, you know. And you know, then I also felt that, you know, because the Zen practice was so important to me, I felt that I wanted to, you know, be ordained. And so I did that. So in any case, all of this is taking away writing time. But
hence 8 years.
Hence 8 years. But the trade-off is that I get to be with young people, right? So I learn a tremendous amount from my students. You know, I learn what it's like to be young right now, and also with the, you know, the Zen practice has always helped me write. You know, because, you know, for precisely that reason, it just allows me to, or it, you know, I've sort of trained myself to stay present, and you know, I think one of the problems with writing is that we're very impatient. Writers are very impatient, and we want to know. You know, we want to know this thing, right? We want to know the book. But, you know, the mindset that you have to have as a writer is, you know, a kind of more patient mindset, and a mindset of not knowing. You have to be okay with not knowing, right? And so there's a tension there. There's a tension between not knowing and knowing, you know, not knowing and wanting to know, you know, between impatience on one side and patience on the other side. So the meditation helps me, you know, sort of sit in that tension, right? And I think the tension itself,
discipline, the discipline of having to actually put or type, in this case, to the computer. This idea of just the creative process, which in your case is because you're doing other things as well. But the book is also a voice. I mean, as we've seen, it's the book of forms, and Emptiness is about voices. And you mentioned about you heard your father's voices. But I also hear sort of your voice present in the book when, through the mouth of maybe the book or the mouth of Icon and the mouth of all the characters, these are your voices, say, for example, commenting about capitalism and global warming and also racial issues and the anxiety about politics and conflicts and so on. Tell me a little bit more about the voices, because Benny is diagnosed with, he hears voices, so he had to be institutionalized because hearing voices is not normal, so to speak. And there's also, all these different voices. Tell me more about the voices.
Yeah. Well, that was what I really wanted to look at. I think that we have a very narrow definition of normal. Normal is a social construct, right? But we think of it as being natural, right? This is normal, this isn't normal. My experience of voices is that, there are many different kinds of voices, right? And so I think if there's one thing that, I would like, the book to say,
to voice,
the voice, the message is, I think, how wonderful it would be if we could take this narrow little notion of normal and widen it, right? And, right now, it's true that if you tell a psychiatrist or a doctor that you hear voices, chances are you will be diagnosed. You'll receive a
medicated. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a medical diagnosis of schizophrenia or psychosis, and you'll be medicated. And that is not necessarily the best way to deal with this. There are a lot of people who hear voices who, it's just simply not a problem for them. They have a relationship with their voices. They hear them. The voices help them. I think it's ironic that Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, the fathers of psychology, heard voices. They talk about their voices, right? Joan of Arc heard voices, right? Mahatma Gandhi heard voices, right? And so it's not necessarily a pathology. So that's on that side. And then, as a writer, as a creative person, yes, I hear voices. I hear them kind of inside my head, not necessarily outside my head, the way that I heard my dad's voice. I hear them inside my head, but they're very clear. Like Benny's voice is very different from Annabelle's voice, which is very different from the book's voice. And this is part of the, thank goodness we live in a society where, that is not pathologized. That's called creativity. It's not called sickness, right?
Absolutely. You're inspired, like when you're inspired, the muses talk to you. We always talk about how the artist, I'd sleep on it, or let the thoughts or dreams come to me.
Yeah. And so there's this range of voices. Oh, and then there's the voices that many people have, which are the voices that criticize you, right?
Yeah.
And
we have that inside us all the time.
Exactly. And the voices that are telling me all the time, that whatever it is that I'm writing really is terrible. And, you should stop, you should go get a job, just forget about it.
And there was this thing that Benny sort of... are the voices from inside of me or from outside? And the question of what is real, which I thought is like a real huge philosophical question of, question we ask, what is real? What is reality? What is reality?
Well, I have no idea. The book is just the book is exploring that territory, but, for Benny, it's he hears these voices that nobody else hears, right? So it's an unshared experience that can't be verified. It can't be verified to be real, right? So then that becomes that becomes his question. Well, what is real, right? And I feel, as a novelist, the same question. I make up stories for a living. That's what I do. I take things that are not real. Just made up
from
stories
nothing to
from
something.
nothing, and I make something that's real, and so it's the same. There are parallels there. There's parallels in the in this process, and so I think that the idea of the question what is real is a for a fiction writer, right? I feel that it's perhaps the central question that I grapple with. Because of course, I have to make things up. I have to make up, you could call them lies, right? I have to make up fictions.
Well, I call it magic. I mean, it
Right.
existed in your head, and 8 years later,
Yeah.
it's like this
Yeah.
big, tome that you have in your hand, and then
Yeah.
other people can also participate in that,
Yes.
collaborate with
Yes.
that. You
Yes.
mentioned about outliers and people, what's normal and not normal, and the question of identity. And I think this is also in your previous book, mixed race. We were discussing earlier. So your mother was Japanese, right?
That's
and
right.
your father is an American.
Yeah.
So this idea of, being outside, identity, and of course, identity politics is now the sort of things that polarizes us.
Yeah.
Tell me a little more about, identity and also your own experience about being a mixed race, Asian
Sure.
in North America.
Sure.
And Benny, of course, Benny's father is.
And Benny is too. That's right. In fact,
Japanese.
all of my protagonists are mixed race. I don't know why. I just seem to write mixed race characters. I don't have a lot of choice over it. The character kind of comes to me, and then it's like, oh, okay, I understand who you are, right? But in my own case, I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, on the East Coast of in New England, right? And there are not a lot of Asian people. There were not a lot of Asian people around when I was growing up. And so when the sort of white Anglo people would look at me, they would see, an Asian
face,
Asian girl. They would see a little Asian girl, and they had stereotypes about what that Asian girl should be, and I didn't know any differently. So I took on those stereotypes, and I very much thought that I was Asian. I thought I was Japanese. And, so I knew that as a Japanese girl, these were the things that I needed to be. I needed to be quiet. I needed to be obedient. It was okay to be smart. I needed to study very hard. I could play musical instruments. All of these things were, characteristics.
And you do your homework. You're smart,
right.
and you.
That's right. All of those things, But the things that I could not be were, I couldn't be funny. I couldn't be loud. Right. These, I could be pretty, but I couldn't really be sexual, right? So there were all of these things that, these kinds of stereotypes that I had really unconsciously taken on. And then I went to Japan for the first time in college, and people there saw me as American, right? And I suddenly realized, like, wait, everything that I thought about my identity is wrong, and that
what was it about you that they consider American? I mean, is it just your physical, the way you look, or is it the way you move, the way you talk, the way you...
All of that, yeah. And certainly the way I look, my face, the way I, my body language, there's just so many little telling details, right? The way I walk, right? The
way you hold your spoons or chopsticks or whatever.
That's right. And then, of course, I couldn't speak Japanese very well either. So that was another dead giveaway, So it was interesting, but I realized at that point, I can be, loud. I can have a voice. I can, be funny and make jokes if I want, because I'm an American. I can be obnoxious, right? Because I'm an American. And that was really kind of liberating. It was a liberating moment.
They will forgive all your mistakes because you don't know any better, right? I mean,
exactly.
If you're a Japanese, it's known.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
But you're an internationally known author, and is this the identity thing? I mean, how do you see yourself? An author, or an American or Canadian author, or an Asian American author? I mean, or does it matter?
I think ultimately,
because on bookshelves and people try, oh, she is this and she is that, as if to put a kind of a wrapping around you so people know which shelf in the library that they can
Yeah.
stick you in.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think that those labels are marketing decisions, and that they really don't have that much to do with me, that I'm all of these things. I'm all of these things and probably, a lot more as well, as are we all, right? But the label is kind of like a marketing, it's a marketing tool. And exactly, it's all about where to put, what shelf to put that person on, right? And nobody wants to sit on a shelf, right?
Yes,
I think we're
absolutely.
we're a lot more
Words need
complicated.
to be set free. And also, like you said, once a book is in your hand, it belongs to you, right? It depends on your own experiences, which in my case, what resonates is the library theme. I love the library theme. My mother was a librarian.
Oh, how wonderful.
And when I did my master's at SOAS in London, I was helping. I was a library assistant. So in the morning, it was my job would be to shelf books. So I completely can relate to that Dewey Decimal System and the, typing up all the, the different categories. Yeah. So that's great. Yeah. And also the things that I find interesting is Borges, you made your reference to Borges, of course, and the magic realism, and I loved him a great deal.
Too.
And also
I do too.
Walter Benjamin. I did that in the essays he wrote in Paris, and so
beautiful.
Why did you include them?
Well, he was kind of obsessed with objects. He was a real collector, and his arcades project was all about objects, right? But also just his story was really, is tragic, and and his writing is so beautiful. And it also has to do with the library because of this one essay, Unpacking My Library, which is just a beautiful essay about, books as objects. And so when I read that essay, I just thought, well, Walter Benjamin has to be in this book.
Yeah, Walter Benjamin and Borges, of course. He wrote that. I remember reading the Book of Sand of, how every time you open a page and it's like, he cannot find it's always a different page, which brings us, we've still got a few more minutes to go. Your influences. I mean, I know that, I'm just interested, who do you read and who really resonates with you?
I mean, I can tell you who I learned from. I learned from Shakespeare. The idea of the way Shakespearean characters break the fourth wall, right, and speak to the sort of reach outside of the play in order to kind of communicate with the audience. That was something that when I was in college, I just thought was stunning and beautiful. And of course, the language, I still read Shakespeare, while I'm writing, just because the poetry is so beautiful. So, I mean, who doesn't learn from Shakespeare, right?
But Borges seems timeless. There's a timeless.
Yeah, timeless. That's right. That's right. And there's a lot of Shakespeare, little references that kind of filter in to the to the books. Borges is another one. Another writer who was hugely influential was Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Yes, 100 Years of Solitude.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And
that's
so
real mind blowing.
I remember when I read that, I thought, oh my goodness, if I could ever if I could ever write a novel that's this rich and this magical, I would, that would be my dream. So I think it's always good to have impossible dreams,
Yes, and also there's the library thing.
Yeah.
Libraries full of books. I remember working at the SOAS library, and I would go. There's a section with all the missionary papers on. They kept in these, temperature sensitive environment, and I love the smell of really open books that haven't been open for a long time, and it's great. We're losing that.
Yeah, we're losing that.
Tell me about library. How. What do we lose when we lose a library?
Well, I think, we lose the materiality of the printed page. And that to me is really sad. I have my Riverside Shakespeare from college, right? The pages are so thin and they're just lines and arrows and, all of this marginalia all over it, right? And I look at that book and I can remember in that book are all of my memories of being in college and being inspired, right? And that's what we're losing. You can't do that. You can't do that on an ebook.
Yeah. So sad.
It is.
I mean, it's different. I mean,
It's different.
just the whole, the object thing. This is something that you can have relationship. Well, our time is up.
Well,
but before I let you go, there is one question that I think I need you to answer. You were a filmmaker.
Yes.
and then you turned novelist. Just very, very quickly. I mean, it's an interesting kind of. Do you still see yourself as a filmmaker, or are you a novelist? So what happened? What happened there?
Yeah. You know what? To be honest, I ran out of money.
Making films.
Yeah, it was expensive. It was very expensive, and it's hard to get films distributed. And when I realized that I could write, I mean, I'd always wanted to be a novelist. That was my earliest, childhood dream. And I kind of got into the filmmaking, almost by mistake. But then when I realized that I could go back to writing a novel, and I could do it, with like a ream of paper and a pencil, right? And that's all it would cost me. It just, that was my answer. So I've never really looked back. No.
And you'll never go back to being a filmmaker.
I don't think so.
And we are the richer for you being a novelist.
Well, thank you
Ruth
so
Ozeki,
much.
thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you. It's been absolutely enlightening. You should read her book. The book, it's called The Book of Form and Emptiness. Once again, thank you, Ruth, for
thank you so much
joining with us. And I hope one of these days we can meet each other.
In Bali.
Yeah, in Bali.
Good.
In person.
Good.
Okay, well, and again, of course, congratulations
for
the publication of the book. So thank you for supporting the Yayasan Mudraswari Saraswati Patrons Program, and also to the festival's partner who made the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival possible. Don't forget to follow at Ubud Writers Festival on Instagram and on Twitter and Facebook, or visit ubudwriterfestival.com for more information about the program. Thank you very much for joining this session. I'm Desi Anwar. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.